well. So, Sean, let's kick it off with a little bit of recruiting discussion, man.
Let's talk about it. We have begun the most important month in recruiting in a long time for Notre Dame, right? We have visits, 23 kids, 24 kids, and 25 kids even on campus, either for the Irish invasion, which starts on tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. And
Mhm.
we've had some positional camps this week and some visitors coming in each weekend that are very important. And the discussion we want to have today, IB Nation, is what are some of the biggest obstacles facing Notre Dame that might cause them to not be able to close on some of the top prospects from the 23 class, specifically going into the month of June? What are some of the biggest obstacles that could keep the coaching staff from closing like most of us think they can and most of us think they should? What are some of those obstacles? Brian, you can go ahead and start it out for you. What are some of those biggest obstacles? What's the top obstacle in your opinion?
I think for me, it's still convincing offensive recruits that
Mm,
you've got to get them to buy into what you think they can be. I
yeah,
think defensively, it's part of the reason it's been easier to sell defensively, Sean. It's not just Marcus Freeman and all that. That's a huge part of it, right?
yeah,
But you've got something to show. Like, look,
yeah,
you've been pretty good defense the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, you can say to a big time defensive lineman, hey, look, we've had X number of defensive linemen get drafted in recent years. We had 5 defensive ends from one roster go to the NFL. 4 of them got drafted. We had a first-round draft pick at defensive tackle. We've got 2 defensive linemen projected to get picked in this upcoming next year's NFL draft, maybe 3, depending
yeah.
on, if Justin Adamiola can sneak into the end of the draft. And so you can sell that, right? Like you can sell linebacker to a degree. You've had Manti, Jalen, Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa, Kyle Hamilton just won the first round. There's a lot to sell on defense with the exception of corner. On offense, other than offensive line and tight end, 2 positions they're not having any issues recruiting.
No, at
It's
all.
there's still selling to be done.
Yeah,
If Notre Dame was more explosive offensively, if they could have played the whole year like they did the last 6 games, then maybe there's some big time kids already committed in this class. But that's not the case, and so Notre Dame is in a situation where they've got a lot of convincing to do of top prospects.
and I
I think
agree
that's
with
the number one
you.
thing.
I agree with you, and I'm going to give a different perspective of that. And when you talk about recruiting offensive talent, what you pointed out is very true. We might not like to hear this, but this just happens to be the case. Let's take Tennessee, for example, who has Josh Heupel, who has been known for years as an offensive coordinator and as a head coach as somewhat of a genius. He played the position of quarterback. He can relate to quarterbacks. And if you're going to start off any offensive class, you would love for it to start at the quarterback position. And with that being said, he was able to go out and get Nico Iamaleava to commit to Tennessee early. Marcus Freeman is not an offensive guy. He's just not. He's not an offensive guy, but he's the head coach. Some might say it's easier when you have an offensive guy as your head coach. It makes it easier to recruit that side of the position because there's relatability and there is lingo when you're communicating with those offensive recruits that can come from the head coach that might not be able to come from your head coach when he is a defensive guy. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Just wanted to give a different perspective on that.
I think that's a great point, and I think that to add on to your point, Sean, it is the fact that no matter what we think about Tommy Rees and his potential and what he's done and how he's overcome certain things and what we think he can do, he doesn't have a track record. So, you
Yeah,
don't have a situation like where Oklahoma just hired, they're having a coaching turnover. Even though Brent Venables is a defensive coach, he's able to say, hey, look, this is Jeff Lebby. Look what he did at Ole
mhm,
Miss. Look what he did at other places.
right.
You've seen things like that where, you look at Texas. Why has Texas recruited the offensive side of the ball the last couple of years? They have an offense, like to your point, they have an offensive head coach. Tennessee is
Yeah,
another example.
yeah,
And so this is why this year is going to be so important. But the point is, if Tommy Rees can do what I think you and I both think he can do this year, then we're going to have a different conversation next year. But that's not here yet. That doesn't have
yeah,
anything to do with June and July.
Right.
And so they've done a good job on offense. Braylon James was huge. But let's be honest, Notre Dame primarily got Braylon James based on relationships and academics, not because he's like, wow, I see myself being a 90 catch, 1,400 yard guy,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
now, does he want to be that guy? Of course he does. But Braylon's one of those kids, one of those top 100 kids who was looking at a whole lot more than just, am I going to get mine on the field? Yes, he thinks he's going to get his, and they've had some good receivers, and that helps. But it was the bigger picture thing. Because if Braylon James is only making a decision based off of where am I going to catch the most passes, I don't think he's committed to Notre Dame right now.
Yeah.
He's just one of those bigger picture kids. And offensive line, that's an easy sell, right? Running back, they've done okay, but they've gotten solid top 250 guy in Jayden Lamar, not a elite top 100 or 5-star guy, right? So in tight end, obviously they've got a very good tight end committed, but that's not a position that's very hard to recruit in Notre Dame because you have a track record. And so I still believe closing on the top offensive players, the Jaden Greathouses, the Richard Youngs, the Jeremiah Loves, the Ronan Hannafins, the Christian Hamiltons, the even on the offensive line to a degree, not so much on Charles Jagasaw, but on a Monroe Freeling. Can you get in the game down the road during a season with another player? Maybe. But once a kid picks another school, it's going to be like, for example, Sean Carnell Tate, kid you're very close with. It's going to be a whole lot harder to have to flip him down the road than it would be to land him now.
Yeah.
Because even if you go out and have a big year on the field, unless you just blast Ohio State in the opener and, he's comfortable not taking NIL, not taking getting as much NIL money, maybe you could flip him from Ohio State or Tennessee, right? Two teams. But the problem is those teams are also going to be scoring points on offense this year. So it's not like they're not going to be scoring on offense. So it's much harder to flip a kid like that from that kind of program than it is to land a kid the first way. And that's why I think that's the position that they're still falling behind. So, yes, Marcus Freeman can sell himself, and Chad Bowden's doing a great job, and Tom Reese is doing a good job recruiting, and all that stuff's going well, but they just don't have the product to sell at running back, receiver, quarterback right now, and then just offense as a whole to really be able to use the product to land these top kids, which is why I think they're having a little harder time closing as easily and quickly as they were on a Keon Keeley and a Brennan Vernon and a Drake Bowen and Peyton Bowen and guys like that, because there was something they could point to and say, look here, and they just don't have that as much on offense.
And it's something you pointed out. I actually talked to Drake Bowen on yesterday, and he was very upset. He was saying they keep dropping me, and they haven't even seen me play. Like, they keep dropping me in these rankings. They haven't seen me play. And, myself, I'm talking to him. Don't worry about it. Just go out, win another state championship. You're fine. That'll take care of itself. And he's like, no, you don't understand. Like, it hurts me, being able to go out and recruit when they see me dropping. Then I really, don't hold as much weight with recruits. And I'm like, yo, I never even looked at it like that. I'm like, and if he feels that way, then I'm like, yo, maybe this is something I need to bring up tomorrow. Like, would this be an obstacle as well? But going back to what you were saying before we even transition to that, what do you think about the buzz coming off of each weekend in June? Is that going to be important to get some of these guys to go ahead and to be closed by Notre Dame and the coaching staff? Because the offensive line has, like you said, offensive line in Notre Dame, there's a resume there. And the coach that created those guys, he's back. Right. So you would think, Jagasaw, we all feel like at this point that Jagasaw will end up in Notre Dame. Monroe Freeland is coming down pretty much between Clemson, Notre Dame.
Seems to be, yeah.
And Joe Otting, I think, will be on campus as well in June. Another kid that they're in on. So what is it going to take to close the deal? Because most fans, IB Nation, I'm sure they probably feel like the O-line should probably be completed by now. Like, we're in O-line view. Like, kids know what we do with offensive linemen. Why haven't we gotten more than 2 in the class right now?
Right.
And June's going to go a long way to that.
Yeah.
But the obstacle to that right now might be what, in your opinion?
I just think it's who you're going after, and you happen to
Okay.
go after two kids who had reasons that have nothing to do with Notre Dame for why they're waiting. I mean, you've
Yeah.
covered Charles Jackasaw's situation
Yeah.
very closely, and he's not going to make a decision without his mom being on campus first. Well, because of
Yeah.
her job, she hasn't been able to do that yet, right?
Yeah.
And I think they've done everything they can do to put themselves in a good position. Now it's about closing in June when you get mom on campus,
Yeah.
and Monroe Freeling. I don't know if Notre Dame could done a better job, but he's a kid that has told Ryan he's been adamant with him and his family from the beginning that he's going to take this out longer. Maybe
Yeah.
Notre Dame can change that in June, but I think I think that's really kind of been the factor. Elijah Page, kid's never been on campus before.
Yeah.
He's not a highly ranked guy, but I mean Notre Dame loves that kid because they
Yeah.
care more about film than they do what Rivals and On Three and 247 thinks, which is
Yeah.
what every fan should care more about. And so I think those are the reasons why they're recruiting a couple kids that are out of your typical region. So when you look at some of the guys that that Harry Heastan recruited and got was able to get early, not all the kids Notre Dame landed he got early. I think Quentin Nelson was kind of a later decision. Ronnie
It
Stanley
was
didn't decide till December,
December.
but
Yeah.
most kids committed earlier, right? And Alex Bars committed early, Sam Mustipher committed early, Mike McGlinchey, Steve Elmer, but the vast majority of those kids were Notre Dame regional kids. McGlinchey's from PA, Hainsey was from PA,
Mhm.
Eichenberg's from Ohio, Kramer's from Ohio, Josh Lugg is from Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh. They've gotten their Aaron Bankses and stuff like that earlier, but even then, it's just like it's one of those deals where they're just recruiting a different kind of kid. And Harry Heastan didn't get hired till January, so he's starting from scratch in that situation. So I think those are the reasons, and it's a little bit different than the reasons why I think they haven't been able to kind of close out the deal with some of the receivers. Number one is I think a lot of this is a lot of these kids are dead set on taking officials first, and to be honest with you, I think that's smart. I think kids should wait. I hope I would if you could say, hey, I'm going to be football king for the day. What's one of the things that I would do? I would tell I would find a situation where I could tell every kid, hey, unless it's the school you grew up wanting to go to, don't pick a school until you've been to at least 4 different places.
Yeah.
Like 4 different places that you definitely are encouraged to see, that you definitely would be interested in, right? Go to
Yeah.
at least 4 schools. And like Dante Moore had made a comment about, the officials are a different type of deal than the unofficials, and he wants to get the whole feel for it. I wish kids would be a little bit more thoughtful. Now I know Notre Dame fans don't want to hear that, and to be
No.
honest with you, if I'm just looking at this from a Notre Dame fan standpoint, I don't want to hear that either. But for me, it's more about what's right for the kids. I think more and more kids are waiting. Some of it has to do with NIL, right? The more
Yeah.
places you visit, the more followers you get on uh, the more followers you're going to get on Instagram and your socials, which then leads to better opportunities for NIL deals. I mean, that's kind of part of it too. So that's just kind of those are the factors in it. But I think when it comes down more so to the skill players, I think a lot of it has to do with there's just Notre Dame is doing a great job of convincing them what they want to be, but they don't quite have as much as what they are. Now, to a degree, there is, because you can kind of point to the last 6 games of the year, but Lincoln Riley can point to the last 5-6 years.
Yeah.
Josh Heupel can point to the last 4 or 5 years going back to UCF. Steve Sarkisian can point back to multiple years, and that's the challenge. And then the final piece is, Sean, is they're going after better players. And when you go after better players, it usually takes a little bit longer to close them. So what does Notre Dame need to do? Like, this summer, you've got, you look at that first weekend of June 10th, Sean, and you look at the kids that are on campus that weekend, and this
Yeah.
kind of goes back to your original question. The buzz, I think, aspect is very intriguing because when you look at that June 10th weekend and you've got, like, for example, let's talk receiver. We discussed this in a show recently, and I can't remember if it was Ryan or Vince that said it. I think it was Ryan. But we were talking about, or maybe it was you last week. We're talking about dominoes, right?
Yeah.
And
That was
Ronan,
us last week. Yeah.
okay. Ronan Hannafin being that domino that June 10th and 12th weekend. Like, if you can
Hmm.
get him to commit, like, just, okay, stop taking more visits. You've already gone to Clemson. You know we're the choice. Pick us now.
Yeah.
How does that then? Because the next weekend you've got Jaden Greathouse coming on campus, you've got Rico Flores coming on campus, and you've got Christian Hamilton coming on campus. Oh, I'm sorry, you got Rico Flores on campus the week he's on campus. Ronan's on
Yeah.
campus.
Yeah.
And then you've got Jaden Greathouse and Christian Hamilton coming on campus the next weekend. If Ronan jumps into class and Notre Dame is now halfway to their minimum need, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, Jaden Greathouse, we know you love us. We know we're your leader, but hey, man, when are we doing this thing? Because we're in the middle of doing something, and you jumping on board now really helps us. And I think the thing they can do too with those guys is like, look, Ronan's on board, Braylon's on board, Jaden, we need to get you on board. Why, coach? Because we're trying to get this cat from Detroit named Dante Moore, and we're doing the reverse order of what we thought we were going to do, because what we thought we were going to do was get him to then put the class together.
Yeah.
Well, now you've got to put the class together to get him, to help get him. It's not the only reason, but to help get him. And so I think those things can build on each other. Same thing with offensive line. You know, like if they can just crush it with Elijah Page this weekend and maybe get him to commit over the next couple of weeks. I'm not saying that's going to happen. That's completely hypothetical. You know, maybe then that helps you with Monroe Freeland. Like, look, man, you want to be here. You know you want to be here. We want you here. You're our top left tackle. You've got this arbitrary going to go into the fall thing, man. We need you to, if you really want to be here, we need you to make this thing happen.
Yeah.
And I think all those things build on each other. And then defensively, I think too, there's a lot of that there as well. I think defensively, it's about closing out the deal. It's a little different animal. There's no buzz, because you only got one defensive lineman you're going after. Right. You get Jaden Alsbury's your guy. Then there's like 2 or 3 corners that you're trying to get. And so one, like Christian Gray, no matter what the buzz is, he's not committing till July 4th. Right. And so
already set.
Now maybe they can knock it out of the park with him and convince him to make a silent commitment, but then go maybe tell other recruits that, hey man, I'm on board now.
Yeah.
Or at least allow him to, give you the okay to let other corners know, like, hey, Christian's already committed, so we got one spot left. So if you want to be here, we can't be messing around. If you want to be here, we need you to be here. So I think there is a little bit there in the secondary, Sean, but when it comes to the defensive line, it's just about defense front 7. It's just about do what you got to do to get this job done and get those kids. That's really going to be the key for me.
Now, I want to ask you something, because you talk about buzz, and there was a move made on a top recruit. Some might say the #1 player in the state of North Carolina out of the 23 class, wide receiver, Christian Hamilton. And you brought his name up. He'll be coming in June as well. You have the receivers that are still on the board. And I want to make sure that Notre Dame fans understand, don't look at Christian Hamilton as, oh, does this mean that we're not in a good place with Ronan Hannafin or Greathouse or the other receivers? No. This is actually a great move by the Notre Dame coaching staff. Like, okay, if you guys are going to go and continue to play this out and think about it, then we're going to jump on other top players.
Right.
We're going to bring them in. And
well,
if they fall in love, I mean, we talked about this with Ryan yesterday. If Christian Hamilton comes in and says, yo, I want to come, the staff more than likely is going to take
There's no question. There's no question. Yeah. The way that they handled Christian, I think Christian Hamilton is a great example of why this staff is different. And I'm going to pull his highlights up so people can watch while we're talking.
Fantastic.
Because he's a really good football player.
Well, are you pulling out the junior highlights or the freshman highlights? Because the freshman highlights are fantastic.
Yeah, they're really good. I'm gonna pull up the junior highlights. The thing about this recruitment that I just love, Sean, is that the staff did a great job of. They have been recruiting him the whole time. I actually wasn't aware of that. I didn't realize that they had been recruiting him as long as they had, because I remember when he made their top 12, like in January, February, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, wait a minute, hold on a second, like, okay, they're in his top 12, because there's other kids that they put Notre Dame in the top 12, and I'm like, I know Notre Dame's not recruiting that kid. Like Marquise Williams, running back from Pennsylvania, put him in their top 7.
Yeah,
like they're not really recruiting him. Caden Proctor put him in the top 7, and I was like, they're not recruiting him. Which is a great sign that more and more kids are putting Notre Dame in their top groups, even though Notre Dame's not really recruiting, because it just kind of shows that how kids view Notre Dame. But They have been recruiting Christian Hamilton this whole time, knowing that Rodney Gallagher was going to make a decision in July, get him on campus and those kind of things. But, when they thought they were getting Rodney, because there was some rumblings that I had from some pretty good sources that Rodney Gallagher either gave a silent commit to Notre Dame in the Blue Gold game or gave them about as close as you can get to that.
Yeah.
Now, the staff didn't take that for granted, rightfully so, because as you and I know, Sean, when I told you that back in April, I didn't feel good. I didn't feel good about that silent commitment as I did others, and I almost let it slip. But who some others were, but there's other guys that are silent commits that I feel really good. This kid's really explosive.
It's so explosive.
And this isn't Charlotte. This is in North Carolina. He's playing quality competition.
Yeah.
But I just and so they kept recruiting Christian though, which is smart. And as I found out in the last week or so, how involved they've been, it's like, okay, wow, this staff is different, man. They don't assume they're going to get kids until they've gotten those kids.
Exactly.
And so like they didn't just get on this kid and now they got him to visit, because then it'd be a little harder to land a kid like that. If you're going to get this kid out of Charlotte, he's going to visit North Carolina in June. Clemson's looking at him. He's been on campus at Clemson a bunch of times. The only way you're going to get that kind of kid is if you've been on him for a while, and they have. And it just goes to show that this staff is just different, man. But this is him being on campus and them really turning the heat up on him is more about, okay, Rodney's not in the class anymore. And from what I was told at the time, even before Rodney committed to West Virginia publicly, is that when he told Notre Dame staff that he was going to do that, they tried to get him to change his mind. But once he committed to West Virginia, they're like, we're done. Right? Because there's a lot – that decision, I mean, and nobody has any ill will towards Rodney.
No.
It's like, hey, man, you got to do what you got to do. But sometimes the decision a kid makes reflects who that kid is. And I don't mean this in a negative way at all. It's just, okay, is that really a guy that we're going to take on a national scale and play in the games we're going to play in? Is that really the kind of kid that wants to be in that spotlight, that wants to be surrounded by other dudes?
Yeah.
Or does he kind of want to go close to home, be a big fish in a small – and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that decision by Rodney. But that decision tells you a little bit about, who that kid is from a what he's looking for standpoint. And I really feel like I want people to understand when I say who that kid is, that sounds like I'm taking a shot at Rodney Gallagher. It is not. It's every kid's got a different personality. Every kid's looking for different things. It's just about understanding and recognizing as a staff. That's great ball skills right there. That's Sullivan Absher's team, by the way, who they're playing against in that shot right there. It's just more about, this is what he's looking for, checking that box of, okay, that doesn't fit what we need. And now this is what I'm talking about. This is Sullivan Absher's team right here. And so I think that was the eye-opening thing for Notre Dame was, okay, that's why Notre Dame's not still recruiting him, where other kids that have committed elsewhere, they're still recruiting. And Christian Hamilton obviously is that kid that they're like, okay, we like this kid a lot too.
Yeah.
He's a little bit more, maybe he's not quite as explosive as Rodney was, but he's a more natural receiver than Rodney was. And so that's why he was the guy. They immediately started turning the heat up on Christian Hamilton. But if they weren't already on him, Sean, it wouldn't have mattered. You're not getting him out of North Carolina,
no,
or away from Clemson if you just now turn the heat up on him. So you talk about the importance of June. This is your chance. This is probably the only chance you're going to get to really become a player in this recruit. If you don't knock it out of the park with him when he comes on, I think he's coming on the 17th, right? The weekend of the 17th.
That's correct.
If you don't knock it out of the park with him, then you're not going to be a player for him, because this is your official for him. This is his official. And so that's another important one. There's some make or break visits happening this summer too, Sean, where if you don't really have a great visit this time, you may not get another crack at this thing, or you may fall so far behind with other kids that you just like if they're going to have a shot at Caleb Downs, it has to be now.
Has to be now.
They have to just, something has to happen. Something has to be said. Something has to be done in that June visit that just says, you know what, man, like I can see myself at Notre Dame. They've presented something to me that's every bit as good, if not better, than Georgia or Alabama. I could go to those schools and win another one, or I could go to Notre Dame and become a legend. Because here's the thing I would say to Caleb Downs. If you are a starting safety on a team that wins a national championship in Notre Dame, you're a legend. I mean, we're still talking about Pat Terrell and DeJuan Francisco and guys like that, right?
Yeah.
And you go to Georgia and you become Lewis Cine, who's a good football player, first round pick, but is anybody in Georgia going to be talking about him in 5 years? No. And that's just the nature of it. Same thing with Alabama. Half the people I know couldn't even tell you who Alabama starting safeties are. They're good players,
Yeah.
but it's just like you're the next in line.
Yeah.
And that's what Notre Dame can sell right now. And man, he's really good after the catch, man. And
He's
that's
so
what he
good.
brings a
He's
lot to
so
the
good.
table.
Just to go to your Georgia point,
Mhm.
we actually talked to Wes Pritchett, middle linebacker from the 1988 National Championship team, who has been very candid over the last few months that he wanted to go to Georgia. He's from Atlanta, Georgia. He wanted to go to Georgia. He had just gotten back from a trip up to Athens, and he came home. And the very next week, when it was time to make his decision, his dad flat out told him he was going to Notre Dame. Like, you're going to Notre Dame.
Thanks, Pops.
Right? And he said it finally hit him 3 years into his professional career as a member of the Atlanta Falcons. I don't have to go through this. I got a broken hand.
Yeah.
I got a dislocated shoulder. All of my friends from school are working on Wall Street, making more than me.
Mm-hmm.
He said it was an easy decision. Like, I'm done. He said, I went to Wall Street and I've made a ton of money. And we let him know that there were a couple of Georgia kids, Georgia natives, that were still trying to decide whether or not they wanted to come to Notre Dame. He said, who are they? Tell me. And we were like, whoa, wait a minute. And he was like, give me their names.
Right.
It was almost like he was like, oh, I'll let them know.
Right.
He was like, because to be honest, no one cares. He said, no one cares about your Georgia degree outside of the state of Georgia.
Right.
And that right there, just goes a long way. If you can get these kids to understand.
Alabama's the same way too, Sean.
Yeah. Like, did you just point it out? Like, you're going to stand out more as a great player on the field at Notre Dame. And once you leave the game, you're going to stand out even more with this degree.
That's why so many famous people send their kids to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point in time, I'm walking around and I'm like, okay, I just walked past Torrey Hunter, David Robinson, and John Bon Jovi
on the sideline.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, because all their kids are at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And it's a different animal, right? I mean, and that's why you see so many former NFL professional athletes sending their kids to Notre Dame, because they understand what you understand, Sean. Like, like Wes Pritchett said, like, I don't need this. Now, the money's a little different now than it was in 1992 or whenever when he retired, but still, it's the same principle, right? Because the kids don't leave Notre Dame are making even more money too with their degrees. So, but to have that shot, though, you still have to be able to at the end of the day, you still have to be able to present a football option for these kids, and that's going to be the key. And so that's where the pressure in June is on, Sean.
Yeah.
And the other challenging part of this too is because the recruiting cycle has been sped up so much, you have 23, 24, and 25 kids all coming on campus this summer.
Right.
And so you also have to measure you've got chances to make impressions on 24 kids that are going to be on campus this summer too, which only adds to the burden of what the summer has become. and so it's a big month, because now for a 24 kid, you don't want to make sure if a kid comes on campus, maybe, and they're smart, they're not bringing a ton of 24 kids on the official visit weekends.
Right.
There'll probably be some, but when these kids do come on campus, you have to make sure that you're not giving them enough attention to where then now you're playing behind the rest of the way.
Yeah. Which we have to point out, Young is coming in all by himself.
Right. Which is important.
Number one running back, middle of the week, all by himself.
He's another one, Sean. This is your chance.
This is your chance.
You got a shot from the 13th to the 15th. That's your shot. If you don't, hit a grand slam, walk off bottom of the ninth, Game 7 World Series home run, you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get them, but you're going to get your chance. And I'm a lot more confident now than I've been in a very long time about the ability of this Notre Dame coaching staff to actually hit that. Like, this is the kind of, you remember when Jacques Patrick visited a number of years ago for Irish Invasion, like when it first started?
That's the name. Yeah.
And people are like, oh, they might. I'm like, guys, they're not getting Jacques Patrick. Come on, man. And
he ended up at Florida State, right?
Yes. And there was another big time running back in that class that visited that summer, and I was like, guys, Come on.
Like, relax.
They're not getting that guy. And, this one is one of those ones where it's like, you know what? Like, I don't think they're going to get him, but I'm not, uh,
Like
I'm
we
not
said,
writing that off. I'm not dismissing this staff.
no,
I'm not going to just say Dylan McCullough's not getting that guy.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
Tommy Reese can't get that guy.
yeah,
So I'm not going to put anything past the staff now.
yeah.
There was a quote from, I think it was a quote from Ryan that he got. No, it wasn't that. I'm trying to remember who it was. Sean, maybe you gave it to me. This is the bad thing about having such a big staff now is I'm trying to remember who told me stuff. Somebody told me that he was told by, I think it was Jaden Lamar, or maybe I read it. Maybe somebody else tweeted it. I can't remember where I heard it. So if it wasn't from one of my guys, it was from another source. I'm not purposely giving credit to my staff. But it was something along the lines of Jaden Lamar said he talked to Marcus Freeman. I think this might have been actually from another site, tweeted it out.
Okay.
Now that I think about it. But he said he talked to Marcus Freeman more than he talked to any other position coach that was recruiting him. If that's true of Jaden Lamar,
Yeah,
what do you think the conversations are like with Richard Young?
yeah,
You know what I mean? And
yeah,
Jason Moore and Jaden
yeah,
Alsbury. So
yeah,
I'm excited to see what they can do. I think it's a group that's got a chance to be a great class, but if they can just get a couple kids, here's the thing, Sean. Last part of this, you talked about momentum.
yeah,
If they can somehow get one or two kids from the June 10th to 12th visit weekend, so the potential guys are like that I'm looking at is like Ronan Hannafin, right? He would be one on my list. Jason Moore, Jaden Alsbury, or Christian Gray. One to two of those four kids get one to publicly commit, and if one other can at least silently commit. So, like, let's just say hypothetically, again, total hypothetical. I'm not dropping a hint that really is going to happen, but the total hypothetical.
right.
Let's just say Christian Gray wanted to commit, but still wants to honor the July 4th decision date. That would still have an impact if they can get at least two guys from that weekend to commit. So, what was I say? Ronan Hannafin, Jason Moore, Jaden Alsbury, Christian Gray, just one to two of those four guys to commit, then I feel that would give Notre Dame a chance to get some momentum going to kind of close out.
Yeah.
That would be the key for me.
If something else I wrote down, patience.
Yeah, I know where that's coming from.
Patience, right?
Yes.
And I say this not only because of the coach, I think just the fan base in general. Like, we're having to learn patience. You talked about this coaching staff is different, and they're taking recruiting at Notre Dame into a totally different realm that most of us haven't been used to under the previous regime. They have to learn how to be patient. We as a fan base have to learn how to be patient, because you're going to have a Monroe Freeland who wants to take into the fall. You're going to have a Samuel Mpemba who's supposed to come into June. But as a staff, you recognize, you know what? He's taking us into the fall. Let's go ahead and use this official for the Clemson game rather than now, because it's more beneficial to do it then than to do it now. So patience is going to be key. I actually spoke with a couple of days ago, and I'm sure a story will probably be going up in the next day or so. But I didn't have time to put it on the message board before we did the show. But I spoke to Charles Jagasaw, and the more he gets into the process, Brian, remember we talked about this, like what he's saying all the right things. He seems like a Notre Dame fit, seems like a Notre Dame kid. Like, why is he talking about being patient and dragging this thing possibly into the season? And then all of a sudden he goes through his April visits and he's like, okay, probably August before the start of my season. And I talked to him a couple of days ago, like, yo, you're a week out from starting the process of these visits with your mom. Like, where are you sitting? And all of a sudden he's like, man, I'm excited. I can't wait to get through the visits with my mom and see what she thinks. And, man, I look hopefully to have a decision at the end of the month of where I'm going to go. And I'm like, whoa, how did we get to here? Like we've gone from fall, August, and now you've embraced the process so much and you're enjoying yourself so much that you're becoming even more sure of what you want to do. And now possibly we might see a decision shortly after your visits in June. So that's the way this recruiting thing works, man. These
Right.
kids, they'll tell you one thing and then they love a part of the process and they become even more sure of where they want to go. The next thing you know, I'll have an announcement date. So this is how it goes, and this is where the patience comes into play. Learning that, knowing that, seeing what each kid needs individually, and then making the move. Like you said, with the wide receivers, they had already been talking to Christian Hamilton, but on top of that, when the whole Rodney Gallagher thing was going on, they said, you know what, we're going to turn up the fire even more on Christian Hamilton and get him on campus, because we're not about to just put all of our eggs in this basket. That is Rodney Gallagher. And, I talked to Coach Wilson. Christian Hamilton, he said, and Coach Wilson's coached for over 20 years, said he's the greatest football player he's ever coached in 20 years. So this is, once again, fans, this is not a panic move. Oh, we're not getting this guy, didn't get that guy.
This is how recruiting is supposed to go.
Yeah.
I mean, Alabama wanted Arch Manning. They didn't get him.
Yeah.
They quickly turned to Eli Holstein and got him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, Sean, I think we've kind of done a nice job of putting the bow on what's at stake in June and July. I got to respond to what you and I have both been responding to in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
About this secondary recruiting. Look, there's one thing that we'll both acknowledge. Yes, Notre Dame has to do a better job continuing to improve cornerback recruiting. However, if all you're going to do is list off recruiting rankings, you're not doing this argument correct. Because somebody somebody said we don't have a single top 250 recruited cornerback. Cam Hart's one of the 10 best cornerbacks returning in college football. He was in the 600 as a recruit. I ranked him in the top 150.
Yeah.
So who was right or wrong here? You know what I mean? Like, Notre Dame beat Alabama and Washington. Washington, who has produced as many DBs in the last 5 years as any team in the country outside of maybe Bama and Ohio State and LSU, maybe.
Yeah.
Wanted Benjamin Morrison bad. Alabama wanted Benjamin Morrison hard, and Notre Dame got him. But there's no excitement about Benjamin Morrison with some people. Why? Because his recruiting rankings. There are far too many people who put emphasis on what Rivals 247 and now On3 say, and not enough on what people who actually do this for a living and whose jobs depend on. If you rank a kid high and he doesn't pan out, you don't get fired. If you recruit kids and they don't pan out, you get fired as a coach, right? Like, this is the problem with this. Are the rankings accurate sometimes? Sure. Are they inaccurate sometimes? Absolutely. But when you're like for example, I love Devin Moore. You know that. And just because he went to Florida doesn't change my opinion. I love Devin Moore. He was a top 100 caliber player. Mm-hmm. But the whole time that he was committed to Notre Dame, I ranked Benjamin Morrison higher than him. I guarantee you, this is 100% certainty. Notre Dame, as a pure corner, ranked Benjamin Morrison ahead of Devin Moore. Absolutely. Yet because Devin Moore jumped into the top 100 of the recruiting rankings, people view that Notre Dame lost their best corner commit. Yeah. They didn't.
Yeah.
Their best corner commit shows up tomorrow to Notre Dame. His name's Benjamin Morrison, right? And so does Notre Dame need to improve its secondary recruiting? Yes. But what we're not doing enough of is acknowledging that that's already started. It started in 2021 when Mike Mickens went out and got Ryan Barnes, Philip Riley, Chance Tucker, another kid that they beat Washington for, in a year where Notre Dame his first whole year recruiting, he couldn't go on the road and recruit.
Right.
And then last year, he got 2 4-star cornerbacks, 2 top players, in my opinion, with impressive offer lists in his second cycle. That's already begun. Yeah. Notre Dame beat Clemson and Georgia for Ryan Barnes. Clemson wanted him, and Georgia had offered him and was turning up the heat. Notre Dame got him. But Notre Dame, too many Notre Dame fans don't think he's a big-time player. Why? Because he's a 3-star.
Right.
Right? And that's the problem. So, yes, we can acknowledge that Notre Dame needs to up their recruiting in the secondary.
Yeah.
But not enough people are acknowledging that they've already started to do that. And if you're going to sit there and tell me we don't have a single top 250 cornerback on our roster outside of Jaden Mickey, that says a lot more about the recruiting services than it does about Notre Dame's talent at cornerback. Because if Cam Hart wasn't a top 250 recruit coming out of high school, then I need to find something else to do with my life.
Can I ask you a question?
And I've been proven to be right about him because look at him. He's one of the best cornerbacks in the country coming back. And that's not just my opinion. Lindy's Magazine, right here. They have Cam Hart ranked 10th in the nation at cornerback coming back. Only one cornerback on Notre Dame's entire schedule is ranked ahead of him, and it's a kid number 9 at Stanford. That's it. And so, at some point in time, you've got to look at recruiting rankings as a just a part of the discussion, and not looking at it as the end all be all or top of the decision maker of identifying a kid's talent. If you are looking at evaluating Notre Dame's roster, and the first thing you go to is recruiting rankings, you're not doing it right.
No.
Now, can recruiting rankings be a part of the conversation? Yes, they should be. Otherwise, why would I do them? I'd be the biggest idiot in the world to say that recruiting rankings don't have some value when I do them. But you've got to put them in the proper context. You have to. And once a kid gets on campus and shows something one way or the other, then then you have to kind of throw it out. I mean, and so a lot of it is,
like I said, I see the chat, and I don't, people are saying they don't think he's as good as a player. You don't have to believe us. It's the offenses that don't throw at him. Don't believe us.
Yeah.
Every offense they faced last year went the other way.
Yeah.
And didn't want a chance.
Well, after the Wisconsin game.
The only team that dared to throw with their number 1 receiver got picked off twice. And that was Wisconsin.
Right.
So, look, you don't have to believe us. You don't have to believe recruiting rankings. This is the question I have to ask you. The number 4 overall pick in the NFL draft, who recruited him? Brian?
Mike Mickens.
Who recruited him?
Mike Mickens.
Oh, what was he ranked?
In the 1600s.
1600s? Okay. Mm-hmm. So is it more about rankings or development?
It's about rankings, Sean. You can't coach a guy up who's ranked outside of the top 2.
That same coach that's our defensive back coach got that kid ready to play as a true freshman, right? And now he's the number 4 overall pick in the NFL draft. Right. But he was ranked as the 163rd cornerback in the nation.
Right.
And the 1600th prospect in the nation.
Right.
Coming out of high school. But he's number 4 overall pick based upon the guy that's our defensive back coach that watched film and said, this kid's special. So that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. And I've watched Jaden Mickey enough this spring to be able to say that's a special kid that's going to be at Notre Dame for the next 3 years. So I don't know how much you can put on him when he's in the infancy as a position coach and recruiting wise at Notre Dame. I don't know.
I'm gonna give you some numbers, Sean. I'm gonna give you some numbers. Okay. In 2021, there's this kid named Julian Love. Remember him? In 2018, I mean. Remember that kid, Julian Love?
Yeah.
Not sure if you remember him. He was a 3-year starter.
Mm-hmm.
2017, he was ranked in the top 5 in passes defense. That's interceptions plus breakups.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2018, he was a consensus All-American. Correct?
Yeah.
As a sophomore, the year in which he finished top 5 in passes defense, he gave up 36 completions for 423 yards. As a junior, a consensus All-American season, he gave up, and this is with Troy Proud on the other side, he gave up 42 completions for 413 yards. He allowed 43.2% completion percentage against him, 50.7 for his career.
Yeah.
Okay, so 423 yards allowed in 2017, 413 yards allowed in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Gave up an average of 39 catches a year.
Yeah.
Completion percentage for his career, 50.7. It was 53.2 as a junior when I was All-American. Cam Hart last year, his first year as a starter, 2 years after moving from receiver. gave up 32 completions, 335 yards. So he was, say, 78 yards fewer than Julian Love
Yeah.
and 10 catches fewer than Julian Love the year that Julian Love was a consensus All-American. So, I mean, other than your perception or being obsessed with his recruiting ranking, there's
Yeah.
nothing about you, nothing about him, how his perception. I mean, so it's like you got to say everyone else in the country is wrong about Cam Hart except for me. So I mean that just doesn't fly. That doesn't fly. So, you can continue to think that he's not a good player, but the fact of the matter is Cam Hart is way better than recruiting rankings thought, which is what I said at the time.
Yeah.
And he's proven that to be true. So, but that also doesn't mean that Notre Dame is perfectly content there. There were recruiting issues from before, which is why Clarence Lewis had to play sooner than he did.
Absolutely.
There's no question. And so we need to be able to say one of two things. Number one is, yes, Notre Dame does need to recruit better in the secondary. There are question marks opposite Cam Hart. There are. We have said them many times.
Yeah.
But if you can't at least acknowledge certain things, then we're not really having a
objective conversation.
We're not. We need to be able to say, like, for example, safety. Notre Dame's safety position is going to be pretty good this year because they got a transfer from Northwestern. If they don't get that transfer from Northwestern, we're a lot more concerned about the safety position. It's got to get better.
Right.
Development and recruiting. We can have that honest conversation. We can say cornerback recruiting's got to get better. But you also then need to be able to say, but it's getting better. It's already gotten better. There's talent there. And people recruiting rankings were wrong about this kid over here who teams won't throw at and who has been excellent the last 2 years. I mean, it's like Stanford, and here's some funny stats for you. So Stanford completed 4 passes on Cam Hart for a total of 7 yards. Do you know why? Because they count throws that were like 2-yard catches against off coverage. They count as a completion against him.
Right.
So, yeah. So anyway, I just want to wrap it up with that conversation because I saw what was going on in the chat and I was like, we're allowed to have differences of opinion here, but if you can't at least acknowledge that part of it, then we're not having an objective conversation.
I mean, my problem is we're talking about replacing people that haven't even had time,
right,
to really build on what was a bare cupboard when they came in, and you can't say that he can't recruit when he just had 2 defensive backs taken, that he recruited at his previous spot and developed. They were on the field early. Like, that's why Jaden Mickey is being talked about getting run early in the season because of the development that's taking place.
And the thing we have to remember about last year's freshman class, for example, Ryan Barnes, who was the top corner in that group, Notre Dame felt he was their top cornerback commit. He missed his whole senior year because of COVID.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, those are the things you have to look at, right? You
can't talk recruiting and then say, I don't want to talk about development.
Right. That's the whole point.
Why do you think Nick Saban coaches the defensive backs? Yes, he goes and gets the best defensive backs, but they still come in needing coaching.
His first title team had 2 cornerbacks who were 3-star recruits. Javier Arenas and Kareem Jackson were both 3-star recruits.
3-star recruits. And they've been getting 4 and 5 stars. Wouldn't you say they've been getting 4 and 5 stars the last 3 years?
Sure.
And the biggest.
Their secondary's been mediocre.
Been awful or mediocre.
And that included having a stud like Patrick Surtain on their cornerback list.
Absolutely. So once again, stars, rating system.
And we're not saying they're there yet. No one's saying that. No one is saying, no. Notre Dame's going to win a title this year because of their secondary. No one's saying that. But at the same time, you also have to be willing to admit that A, it's gotten better, right? And B, some of the guys were misevaluated not by Notre Dame, but by the National Recruiting Services. I mean, and if you can't at least admit some of that, then Like if your only view of great recruiting Notre Dame equals recruiting ranking here, then
Yeah.
did you think that Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was a bad pickup? Did you think Isaiah Foskey was a bad pickup? He wasn't a top 200 recruit,
No.
right? I mean, so that's the thing you got to go down is like, look, you have to be able to put recruiting rankings in the proper context. And because here's the other thing, when a kid develops, it doesn't always mean they were wrong. Kids develop differently. Kids develop at different times. I had no problem with anybody that ranked Joe Alt as a 3-star last year. None. Not a one. I had him as a 3.5-star kid. But you looked at him and said, boy, this is a kid with a lot of ceiling, though, right? But he's got, we got to see if he can make the transition, blah, 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 which is why I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at Joe Alt now, it's like, did they get hit? Did they get it wrong? Or was it just this is a kid that's still developing,
Yeah.
and he's developing at a different age than Blake Fisher, who was a monster as a freshman in high school, right? I mean, that's part of it. They don't always get it wrong, but kids develop at different ages. Like I was talking to Coach Mickens at one point in time, and I asked him, like, did you guys think that Sauce Gardner was going to be the player he was? He goes, no, we loved him coming out of high school. We didn't view him as a kid that thought was going to be a first-round NFL draft pick. But we knew pretty early on that he was going to be that guy, that he had a chance to be that guy. So it's about, because he was like, I think he was like 145 pounds when he enrolled as a true freshman.
Yeah.
Guys, and so it's not always like every time a guy develops, the recruiting services aren't wrong. It's just sometimes it's like kids develop differently. And sometimes they were flat out wrong about Cam Hart. And I said so at the time. They were wrong about Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, who I had as a 4-star player with 4.5-star upside. I actually didn't give him enough of a upside grade. I should have given him an even higher upside grade. They're wrong sometimes, so, but sometimes kids develop differently. And so you can't, if we're having a real conversation about winning a national title, you can't have a conversation about recruiting without development. It's a useless conversation.
You can't.
It is.
But the coach is watching the tape saying, this kid is going to be this in 2 years.
Right.
Like no one wants to say, I need this kid on the field next year.
They didn't recruit Ryan Barnes to say, we think he's going to start. He was a kid that they always thought was going to need some time, but they loved his talent. And then when you factor in the fact that he missed the senior year because of COVID, it adds to it. So let's let these kids get a little bit of time at Notre Dame first before we just assume that they weren't good players because of their recruiting ranking. That's all we're saying.